You want to get into property, but you've got £1,000 or less in the bank and you feel like you're stuck. What do? Well, I'm going to give you 5 ways to get started in property under £1,000. I'm going to rate each strategy based on number 1, how realistic it is, 2, the difficulty in getting started, and number 3, the potential earnings. Let's get into it. Now, before I get started, let me give you a stat that might actually surprise you, which is that more than 11,000 million Britons have less than £1,000 in savings, which accounts for about 1 in 3 working age households. Why am I telling you this? It's just to give you that reassurance that you're not the only one and you're definitely not behind. It's so easy to compare yourself to others who are ahead of you financially, but the reality is that everyone is dealt different cards, and just looking at those stats, it seems like it's completely normal to have less than £1,000 in the bank, so you don't need to feel bad about yourself, not at all. The fact that you have any money is a great start, but what should encourage you is that you're here, think about it, watching this video, trying to learn what to do with that money. You're heading in the right direction, and if you just keep at it, it's only a matter of time till you have a lot more money. By the end of this video, I hope to get you taking action on one of these 5 things I'm going to talk about, so that your £1,000 will grow into multiple £1,000s or even £1 million one day. So when most of us think of investing in property, we always imagine like this house. When you invest in it, you have to own all of it. But guess what? I mean, you can do that if you've got the budget for it, but if you haven't, that's not a problem either, because something called property crowdfunding, which allows you to invest in a share of a property or portfolio of properties. Best way to describe property crowdfunding is that your funds are pooled together along with many other investors, and those funds are then used to buy a property, or it's lent to developers as a loan to finance property development, and in return you own a portion or little slice of the property rather than owning the whole property. The best thing is that with property crowdfunding, you can get started in property or owning some property with as little as £100. To get started, I would research a few property crowdfunding platforms, looking for some FCA regulated ones like the London House Exchange, which used to be called Property Partner. There's a few others like Simple Crowdfunding and Yielders. So yeah, do your research, make sure they're FCA regulated, and just be mindful that investments through these platforms, they can be illiquid and returns aren't guaranteed. As long as you understand that and you're comfortable with that, then you're good to go. Create an account with one of the platforms I've just talked about, or anyone you find, then you'll be made to go through a verification process, and then you can start investing your money into properties best suited for you. I would initially start with small amounts to understand the process and risks involved, and then build it up that way. In terms of realistic, I would give this a 9 out of 10, because as long as you're willing to invest your money, then there's nothing stopping you. There's loads of platforms to choose from. So yeah, getting started, I'd say, is a 9 out of 10 when it comes to how realistic it is. Difficulty wise, I would say it's fairly easy, and you can get started investing in property from a few clicks these days, so I'd give it a 2 out of 10 for difficulty. In terms of earning potential, I would say it's average, giving it a 5 out of 10 for potential upside, because ultimately you are still relying on other people to be able to make you that money. So yeah, 5 out of 10 for that one. We'll get back to the video in a few seconds, but 70% of you watching this video aren't subscribed to my channel. Please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button and buy more properties in the next few months. I'll be sharing everything so you can learn from my mistakes for free. Anyways, back to the video. If you thought getting into property with £100 was good, then you'll love the next one, REITs, which is short for Real Estate Investment Trust. In a nutshell, a REIT is a publicly traded company that owns income producing properties like offices, retails, apartments, hotels and hospitals. Beauty with REITs are that unlike regular companies that can hold on to their profits, REITs must distribute at least 90% of the profits every year back to the shareholders. So if you've invested in a REIT, then you'll be getting regular payments in the form of dividends. So regular dividends are definitely a plus point. Another plus point is that you can literally start investing in REITs with as little as 10 or even £5, which is crazy to think about it. From afar, property crowdfunding and REITs, they both look very similar, and to be fair, they do have a lot of similarities, but I guess the main difference is that you should be aware of is that property crowdfunding isn't as highly regulated as REITs because REITs are publicly traded companies, so there is more accountability. Whereas with property crowdfunding, you're essentially investing in a property rather than the company itself, and companies are always more accountable to the public than, you know, just an asset. REITs are also more liquid, so if you ever want to sell your shares, you can do that instantly because they're on the stock market. All it takes is a few clicks of a button, whereas with property crowdfunding it's different because you tend to get your money back once a specific project is completed, which can be weeks or months or even years. But for me, the biggest advantage REITs has over crowdfunding is that you can hold these investments in an ISA, a SIP or a LISA, making them very tax efficient. To get started with REITs, just choose a brokerage account with a platform like Hargreaves Lansdown, AJ Bell or Vanguard. They're all good. Look for UK focused REITs, that's what I'd start off with. Then match your investment goals and risk tolerance to what you're looking to invest in. Buy your shares and then you can start earning regular dividends tax-free. In terms of realisticness, that was a bit of a mouthful. I'd say it's maximum 10 out of 10 because it's pretty straightforward to get started. Difficulty is like a 1 out of 10 because a lot of these brokerage companies have apps these days making it as easy as possible, right? There's literally no friction. Because you can reap the rewards tax-free, I'd say the earning potential through REITs is still not brilliant. It's pretty decent, a bit better than property crowdfunding, so I'd give this a 6 out of 10. The third one is where things, they start getting more hands on, but there's a lot more potential for making money. And the reason for that is because if you've only got £1,000, you can literally get on the property ladder with that money through a purchase option agreement. I'll be honest, when I first came across purchase option agreements many years ago, I literally thought it was some bullshit. But the reality is that there are a lot of people who have done it successfully. It works, right? Irrespective of what you or I think about it. So how purchase option agreements work is that rather than purchasing the property straight away, where you'd have to put down a 25% deposit, you'd have to pay stamp duty and all those costs that you obviously haven't got the money for. Instead, what you do is you pay the property owner a small option fee, which can be as low as £1,000, for the right to purchase the property later at an agreed price. And the key word is later. To get started with a purchase option agreement, you'd look around for properties that have been on the market for a while and for whatever reason haven't been able to sell, because those sellers are more likely to be motivated sellers, and then you'd reach out to them directly. You can do that by posting a letter through the letterbox, or if the seller doesn't live at the property, then you can just go on the land registry website, search for the owner, and I think you have to pay about £3 for the contact details, and just reach out to them that way. Anyways, once you've managed to get direct access to the seller, you offer them a purchase option agreement, which means you technically buy the house now but agree to pay for it at a later date. Now you must be thinking, just like what I did when I first heard about this, that why on earth would someone want to do that? Now, it's important to remember that this property, for whatever reason, hasn't sold for a long time. I'm talking months and months, sometimes years, right? That's why it's still on the market for. So basically, the seller is struggling to sell it. Either there's something wrong with the property, either they're asking too much for the property, or they're in negative equity. The point is that by offering them a solution to take off the property right now, and you take on the mortgage, they can move on from this transaction, and further down the line, they'll get the money they're happy with. Whilst in the meantime, you've got control of the property, you start paying for the mortgage and the bills and so on, which is another headache that you've taken away from the seller. And there you go, it's a win-win situation. By doing that, you now have control of the property. You can start renting the property out and start making the money straight away from it, with the option to purchase it further down the line in 5, 6, 7 years time, or whatever you agreed with the seller when you do have more money, right? And if you think about it, even if you make like say £250 a month in profit from that property, if you times that by 12, that's £3,000 profit for the year, and then times that by 5 years, you'll have £15,000. £15,000 saved towards purchasing the property, and that's how essentially purchase option agreements work. If you were to ask me how realistic a purchase option agreement is, I'd give it a 4 out of 10. Difficulty wise, it's a solid 8 out of 10 because it's not easy, but when it comes to potential earnings, I'd say it's a 9 out of 10, because at the end of the day, if you do it right, if you manage to do it, you get to purchase a property starting with just £1,000, which is kind of crazy to think about it. And also you get immediate cash flow from the property and you get to own the asset, right, which will appreciate in the future. So yeah, it's definitely hard to execute. It's not easy, but the rewards are there as well. Number 4, rent to rent is another way to get into property with minimal funds. So what is rent to rent? The rent to rent strategy involves renting a property out from a landlord and with permission legally subletting it as a higher cash flowing strategy such as service accommodation or into HMOs. To give you a hypothetical example, let's say you manage to rent a 4-bedroom property out for £750 a month, but instead of renting the whole property back out to a single family, you could let the property out on a room by room basis for say £350 a week. 4 rooms times 350 is £1,400 a month in income. Minus your £750 rent and say £250 for bills and everything else, you'd profit £400 a month from a property you don't even own. Using the same property as an example, paying that £750 a month rent, instead of letting the property out on a room by room basis, you decide to advertise the whole house but as a short-term basis where you charge a nightly rate instead. You could charge something like, I don't know, £120 a night on Airbnb or Booking.com. If you had an occupancy rate of say 70%, which is realistic, if you set it up right, then 120 times 30 days in a month, £3,600, and then times it by 0.7 to get the 70% occupancy, you generate an income, a monthly income of £2,520. And based on a realistic nightly rate and based on a realistic occupancy rate, you've got the £750 rent and your bills and your cleaning costs and so on, which would be higher. But the point is, again, there's money to be made with rent to rent if done correctly. How you can get started with rent to rent, it wouldn't be too different to how purchase option agreements work, where first of all, you'd have to find suitable properties that could be converted to HMOs or fit for service accommodation. You reach out to the sellers directly and then negotiate a rent to rent agreement, emphasizing, the mutual benefits to the landlord, because remember, it's always a win-win situation. That's what you have to be creating. This strategy, it's very hands-on, and it's important to remember that whilst rent to rent is a property strategy, it's not an investment strategy, because at the end of the day, you don't or can't get to own the asset and you're ultimately at the mercy of the landlord, and there's a lot of work involved. Rent to rent is a property business. It's not an investment strategy. So it's important to understand the difference between the both. It could be a good way to be able to build yourself some cash flow from it, where further down the line you use the cash flow you've just made to buy a property and start owning assets. Just be mindful that there are systems and processes that you can put into place, but ultimately rent to rent is like having another job, especially at the start. That's why I'd give this a difficulty of 9 out of 10. How realistic is rent to rent? I'd say more realistic than purchase option agreements, so let's give it a 6 out of 10. And for earning potential, I would say because you only benefit from the short-term cash flow with this strategy, I'd give it a 7.5 out of 10. The final way of getting started with property, if you've got £1,000 or less, is through a joint venture. Essentially, this involves partnering up with another investor or investors to pool resources and invest in property together. This could be where you have the knowledge, the skills, and time to work on the project. You do all the work, your partner puts down all the money, and ultimately you split the profits 50-50 or whatever agreement you come to. When it comes to finding partners, this could be from anywhere. The best thing to do is look closest to you. Is there a friend or family member who has some money saved up in the bank, not really doing much with it, right? Who is willing to trust you with their money and essentially bet on you to do the work, and they get a portion of the profits for no work involved on their side. When most people start working with investors or joint venture partners, it usually starts with someone they already know and who they've got a connection with, because at the start, if you think about it, especially if you've got no track record or credibility, they're the ones who will be more willing to take a punt on you. But if that's not an option, then you could find partners through networking, online forums, or even social media. It's always important to make sure that the legal agreement is drafted up by a solicitor and clearly outlines each partner's investment amount, profit sharing, and responsibilities. When it comes to how realistic it is, I would say it's fairly realistic. I think for most people, finding an investor or joint venture partner it's more of a mindset thing than actually it being extremely difficult. I would personally give this a 7.5 out of 10 for how realistic it is in finding a joint venture partner. But difficulty, once you've got someone on board, it's really not that difficult because you now got the money. So it's then for you to put the work in and execute your plan. So let's give this one an 8 out of 10. But here's a big one. Out of all the options I've covered today, when it comes to earning potential, this is the highest, no doubt. The reason why that is because if you can find the right joint venture partner or partners, right, then the world is your oyster, because then you've got access to a lot of funds and then you're able to scale a lot faster. So really, the earning potential could be limitless depending on your ability to find these joint venture partners or partners. So I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. Talking about 10 out of 10, I recently made a video where I spent 24 hours visiting 24 of my property projects. It's one of my favorite videos I made. So if you want to see the kind of projects I'm working on and some real 10 out of 10 insights, then watch that video after this one and I'll see you soon.